Hello everyone, my name is Görkem Güngör. Today I will present the IPCC 6 Assessment Report, the chapters 1.3 on the multilateral context, emission trends and key developments, and chapter 1.6, achieving mitigation in the context of sustainable development. The multilateral context since the fifth assessment report. The fifth assessment report was prepared in 2014, right before the signature of the Paris Agreement in 2015, which during the Kyoto Protocol, the climate targets were top-to-down targets coming from the economy to the emission mitigation and adaptation targets. With the Paris Agreement, this reversed from top-down targets to bottom-up nationally determined contributions, where countries, the nationally determined contributions are based on their capability for emission reduction based on their respective capacities. And when they are all added up, these should achieve the climate target. And meanwhile, in 2015, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was initiated, and there was a formal linkage between climate action and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 in total, but they all have relationship with a climate action goal. And as the target shifted from top down to bottom up, on the bottom level, local action became more important. Before it was more government policy, government decision, and this was translated to the bottom layers. And here, as it starts from the bottom, non-state actors have more importance with the Paris Agreement. And as cities, urban places, companies, businesses, they have big potential for climate action. And when all these contribute, all these are accumulated, in total, the climate action can be much better achieved. And also for climate adaptation, as we are already facing climate impacts, the participation of the most vulnerable, the indigenous peoples and the youth is much more important. And following that, the sixth assessment report was prepared in 2022, which I will describe the relevant chapters. The landmark agreements in 2015, the UN Sustainable Development Summit on 25 September 2015, and Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted, which consists of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And each goal has individual targets. Some of them are in synergy and some of them are having trade-offs, but in total, we have 169 targets, and these are measured with 232 indicators. And meanwhile, the Paris Agreement was signed in Paris in COP21 of the UNFCCC on 12 December 2015. And the target is to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and with an ambition for 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels relative to the industrialization era. The emission trends, the emissions has been increasing since the fifth assessment and the sixth assessment report. The average annual greenhouse gas emissions during 2010 and 2019 were higher than any previous decade. However, we can be optimistic that the growth rate has slowed. The annual growth rate was 1.3% during between 2010 and 2019, compared to 2.1% in the previous decade. There are also regional differences where the growth trend in Asia and in Europe, they are not similar. And these can be measured by indicators. Here on this graph, this is the global data and indicators. We have on the top left, the trends in global greenhouse emissions with the gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per year from fossil fuel and industry, carbon dioxide, methane, fluorine gases, nitrous gases, carbon dioxide emissions from land use change and forestry. And this is calculated together with the gross domestic product data for calculation of the emissions intensity, where we can see that the emissions intensity compared to GDP has decreased since 2000. But the main trends are still fixed. I mean, we have carbon dioxide emissions per capita, which has increased. More or less, it's stable, but still the trend has not reversed for reduction. The main drivers are fossil fuel combustion and industrial processes, which remain as the primary drivers of absolute emissions. Here, this is a bit off the topic, but I wanted to mention about the IPCC 6 Assessment Report Scenario Database. Based on the historical trends, in each assessment report, a scenario database is generated by the IPCC, and this greatly relies on integrated assessment modeling teams, which link energy, society, and climate based on socioeconomic assumptions, which of course are based against historic trends, which historic trends they also change. In the past, in the special report on emission scenarios, there was quite simple scenarios like either to be climate friendly or to be not climate friendly. But the world is heterogeneous. The regions have different interests. There are rivalries which increase at the moment. So this is a very dynamic process. And you can see just for a simple study, a technical working group. This is related to the Oceania, 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Oceania, the islands, which are the most vulnerable against climate impacts. But even in this simple study, you can see that the final energy projections are very dependent on the scenario assumptions, and they have a very wide range. For Turkey, in the past, I had my graduate study thesis, but it was much simple, of course. It was only a baseline, current policies, and net zero emissions. There's only one changing variable here, the carbon price, and nothing else. But this is a simple energy model, and on the right side, these are integrated assessment models. The relationship between mitigation, climate mitigation, and sustainable development. Climate mitigation does not occur in a vacuum. It affects the social and well-being of societies and individuals. We are already facing climate impacts, and there are additional social challenges which the world faces. There are still large parts of the world where people cannot have access to affordable energy. So mitigation must be assessed alongside poverty eradication and economic development. There are synergies between sustainable development and climate action, which can reduce emissions as a positive side effect when we are improving like industrial processes or home appliances. Together with economic development, we can also have co-benefit on the environmental protection and climate action. But there are also trade-offs between these goals. So careful governance is required. We should not poke the eye out when we are trying to solve something. And we should keep no one behind in the just transition. In the past, also compared to the gross domestic product, the Human Development Index was and had been recommended by researchers as a more just way of representing the societies, the countries' development level. Having a high GDP doesn't mean that the people have their well-being is high. Depends on other factors like quality education, good health services, and decent work and economic growth. So when we use this indicator and we compare the greenhouse gas emissions per capita against historical development index, we can generate a sustainable development pathway, which is off the trend at the moment, which should be reduced to reach the sustainable development corridor. There are offshoots already, the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, which are all industrialized countries, Northern and Western Europe. There is a potential for these countries to enter into sustainable development pathways. And for the developing countries, there is also an opportunity to stay in the sustainable development corridor. So this is also a good way to represent the synergies between sustainable development and climate action. And this is a graph showing how they indicate what the indicator includes: life expectancy at birth, schooling, quality education, and gross national income per capita. And what has changed since the sixth assessment report? Our emissions has increased. And the most striking from this article, published in 2025, is that our remaining carbon budget has drained from 500 gigaton carbon dioxide to nowadays 130 gigaton carbon dioxide. We are draining the global carbon budget very fast to achieve the ambitious climate target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the climate impact is also increasing. The global mean sea level rise, land average maximum temperature change, changing global mean surface temperature. These are all increasing at an unprecedented level. So we are not on the road which we aim to be. But still, optimism says that the rate of increasing carbon dioxide emissions over the last decade has slowed compared to the 2000s. So we might slow down the increase. And there's also always a possibility to achieve the climate target despite an overshoot in the short term. Even if we have an overshoot in the long period, we might have net negative emissions to reduce this impact. The second one, this is more linked with the synergy between climate action and sustainable development goals. This is a United Nations report from Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I want to include this because this provides recommendations on how climate action should be enforced from bottom to top in cities, states, regions, rural areas, and communities. The cities are a driving force. They are both vulnerable and also part of the solution. The fragmentation between regions is the biggest enemy. If we leave someone behind, this would also pull us back to achieving our climate and sustainable development goal action. This is just another article. The SDGs, they have targets. These targets can have synergies and trade-offs. This depends on the context, actually. For example, a hydropower plant project, it depends on where you implement this project. If you implement it in Brazil, it has different consequences. If you implement it in Ethiopia, it has much different consequences. And this article was comparing the impact of a hydropower plant in Ethiopia and a nuclear power plant in the United Kingdom compared to the Sustainable Development Goal targets. So in summary, since fifth assessment report, the global climate policy has transitioned from top-down mandates to a bottom-up approach. With the Paris Agreement's NDCs, local action is more important, and when we accumulate local action, we should be able to reach the climate targets. We have the global agreements, the 2030 Agenda, and the Paris Agreement, and these formally link climate action with the other 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The climate action is a prerequisite for all the goals, actually, starting from the first most fundamental goals to eradicate poverty, to eliminate hunger. The climate action has direct link with all these sustainable development goals. We see that emission trends, although the emissions increase and they are the highest in history, the growth rate has slowed down from 2.1% to 1.3%. The mitigation should not be considered in vacuum. It depends on the context where it is implemented. If people have no power to buy appliances for clean transition, then climate mitigation action will have no effect. And there is an acceptance that the global per capita emissions should ideally not exceed 5 ton carbon dioxide equivalent. And it is accepted that exceeding this threshold would correlate with health and education and work effects. And I thank you very much for your attention.